Okay, so as some of you may realize, I'm not Mike Whitehead, so if you guys were here for this talk, I'm sorry to disappoint, but so I'm Victoria. I'm going to be talking about how the year of the Linux desktop is never going to happen. So the year of the Linux desktop, it's been said for decades, and as it has lost its meaning over time, people still believe that every year it's going to be this year. And there's a reason it keeps coming up, right? People get more concerned about privacy and freedom each year. And with all of that, Linux feels like a breath of fresh air. So why hasn't Linux hit the mainstream? And what's stopping the average user from using it in their day-to-day? Starting with the state of Windows. So, quick show of hands, who's used Linux in any capacity? Okay, who uses it on their desktop? Okay, so yeah, undoubtedly some of you will know that Windows has some pretty severe privacy issues. Actually, the other week I had to set up a Windows VM, and the amount of telemetry you have to opt out of is actually insane, like app usage, location data, searches, diagnostics. It's all disguised under this promise of improved user experience. And of course, it's fair to understand that, we don't really know what's going to be going on since it is closed source. And the fact that there's ads riddled throughout the OS, it's fair to be skeptical about their privacy claims. I mean, even XZ had a, backdoor that no one knew about for some time. And it's true that Linux has been on the rise after the release of Windows 11, and it's, clear to see why. So, Windows is pushing AI everywhere with their Copilot release, and even more notably Recall. And if you haven't heard about Recall yet, it's basically this new feature they've been releasing now about, basically it takes a screenshot of your screen whenever it changes, and it stores them locally, but we don't really know about that yet. And you essentially need a Copilot Plus PC to run it, and those are Windows 11 PCs that are powered by an NPU, and I found that quite interesting because why would you need a processor that can handle 40 plus trillion operations per second? Okay, so quiz time. How long do we think Recall snapshots are saved for? Is anyone for 12 hours? No? 3 days? 3 months? Okay, well, yeah, you all guessed right. That is way more than enough time for a hacker to start trying to get access to that, and then, if they get hung up on it, they can just go on holiday and come back with a fresh peace of mind. So, in addition to that, they have their new Pluton chip, which they claim to be the future of Windows PCs, but they're essentially just hardware-level tracking with their chip-to-cloud technology. So even if Recall snapshots are local, there's definitely still a risk with that. But despite those security risks, there's, obviously some restrictions that could come with that. So, it could stop you from using certain apps like Tor, or even stop you from dual booting Linux, which feels quite concerning, right? And it's no surprise that people are looking for alternatives. With the Windows 10 support date ending in around a week or so, a lot of people are choosing to switch to Linux after that. So could the year of the Linux desktop be here? Well, first we have to know what, the year of the Linux desktop is. And I think the closest way to describe that is if any average user can install and navigate Linux without encountering any major issue that can't be fixed. In addition to that, all of their, personal and work tasks must be able to be done. And those of you who do use a desktop Linux, you will obviously know that this can already be done now. Well, while it's true Linux has come a long way, and for most users, all you really need is a couple Office apps and a web browser. You can do anything that on Windows that you can do on Linux. There's literally a free open source app for everything, whether it's art or video editing or Office apps. So, in addition to that, Linux does outrun Windows in a lot of different ways. Boot times, for example, response times, Linux is the clear winner. And there is still that preconception that Linux isn't fit for gaming, and it's complicated because it's for games with kernel-level anti-cheat like Valorant or Rainbow Six Siege, that's never going to be able to run on Linux. But for basically every other game, you can run it on Linux, and often with better performance. But even despite that, it's completely fine for everyday users, so why aren't more people using it? Obviously, most devices that you get are going to be pre-installed with Windows on them. Just August this year, the market share for Windows was 71.5%, with Linux sitting at just 4.6%. And there definitely has been quite a steep rise, but when Linux is pre-installed, it's only marketed towards enthusiasts. Think Linux laptops or a Steam Deck. And people kind of just want something that works and what they're comfortable with, and we can't really blame them for that. I mean, we all know someone who struggles to use Windows, never mind Linux. So people just don't really have time or interest to learn a whole new operating system, or rather unlearn one. But when I do witness someone being like, okay, how do I get started? I really do get excited about that, and they'll go off and do their own research about it, and, they'll come back to me and be like, okay, but what distro should I use? And that's a really complicated question, because I tried to put a tree of all the distributions that stem from Debian, and I couldn't even fit that on the slide. But if you are interested, there's the entire tree of all the Linux distributions on that QR code underneath it. So it was way too big to even fit on the slide. I think it's like 5 megabytes or something. That image is really big. But if you ask anyone in the Linux community, like, what's the best distro for beginners, or what's the, what distro should I start out with, you're going to get 10 different answers. And at first, when people used to ask me that, I would try and ask them questions about, like, how do you use your system? What do you use it for? What specs do you have? And that ended to be, like, quite time-consuming. So over time, I've just kind of been, like, setting to the default, being like, just use Mint or Debian and KDE Plasma. And, there's even more stuff to choose from, even the, thousands of distributions out there. Things like desktop environments or window managers, init systems, display managers, and so much more. And it's like if you're at a restaurant and there's like 1,000 different options for what you could order, and the waiter or waitress just keeps coming to you like, are you ready to order? I'm like, no. And this freedom of choice is really good for advanced users. It's one of my favorite parts about Linux, to be able to choose everything that you want. But for beginners, this can seem really, really daunting. And even after all that effort of you choosing, the distribution that you want and all these types of things, you're still going to get hate for what you get because it's the wrong answer. And then when we do talk about trying to support new users, we often talk about the so-called pain points of Linux. And these are essentially just the most difficult things for a new user to get used to. So these are things like the installation, compatibility issues, learning the command line, which is really difficult even from someone from a technical background, but especially if you're not, that seems like a completely different language. And the most important pain point is just understanding how Linux is different to Windows. A lot of people can go into it and kind of think, it's going to be kind of similar, but once you realize literally everything is different, that's where, some people might start getting frustrated. And all of these types of things build up, and it causes users to sort of give up easily and go back to what they're comfortable with. And Linux does take a lot of time and patience, and some people don't often realize that. And when I was writing this slide, I couldn't help but remember about this iconic video. I don't know if it'll play. Let's see. I don't think it wants to play. Oh, what a shame. Yeah, okay, I don't think that's going to play. But essentially, it's this woman who...
Took the case of a young woman who just wanted to take some online classes at MATC. I'm so glad we could help this woman, because she called us specifically because she wanted to be able to go take those courses at MATC, and she bought a new laptop to be able to do that. That's when she called me. She thought her laptop was coming with Windows. Instead, she got that thing called Ubuntu. Pronunciation was the least of her problems.
It has just been a mess, and I regret ordering the...
She actually, I think she actually drops out later from that, so, yeah. Another really big problem for people who are debating whether to make that switch or not is their hardware. And while it can be done, it's really not uncommon for people to struggle with drivers for things like printers or graphics cards. And some of you might already know what I'm talking about when I say the words graphics cards. And while NVIDIA are transitioning to open source GPU kernel modules, they have been so notoriously awful for their compatibility with Linux. And so much so that actually Linus Torvald said this in an interview.
A lot of chips into the Android market, and NVIDIA has been the single worst company we've ever dealt with. So NVIDIA, fuck you.
So despite all of those things, and if you do start to learn Linux and start getting into that community, and you finally got your foot in the door, there's a notoriously awful community. And while there are so many nice people, so many compassionate people that I've made friends with, there's still a lot of elitism and sort of gatekeeping around that. And when I first started using Linux, I had installed Ubuntu. Actually, I tried to dual boot it, but that didn't go very well. And I ended up just using Ubuntu. And every time I used it, I seemed to encounter some issue. But from my very limited knowledge in Linux at the time, I would try and fix it and then break it even more. And it got to a point where I had somehow deleted loads of dependencies and literally nothing worked. So, you know, I was at the point where I was like, I cannot fix this. So I posted my issue to Reddit. And as some of you might, you know, have guessed already, that I didn't get the most, you know, encouraging comments. And my system was really messed up, so maybe it was a little bit deserved, but reading them just kind of made me want to quit. And I really did want to switch back to Windows, but one very kind person helped me and helped me fix it. But even if I were to switch back, I was kind of scared that I would break it even more, like break my computer or something. So I get it's easy to forget what it was like when you were a beginner, because once you're all fluent in using Linux and you use it every day and that's your normal, you forget about those times when you had to look up basic commands, or you had to read the docs like 10 times before you even understood a single word of it. And the tech circles that you have to be in to first even know about Linux, and then secondly to actually learn more about it and start using it, can be really brutal. And it's really important that as a community, we try and create these beginner-friendly spaces. Because when I first started, I tried to join these so-called beginner-friendly spaces, only to find out that they don't care about beginners at all, and they will just hate on you for even trying. So for some of us, it might seem quite obvious, but we really do need to be a more inclusive environment because, you know, especially if you're not like a cishet white man, trying to join these communities can be really bad if people don't even believe anything you're saying just because you're a woman or something like that. So, you know, in order to make that kind of space, we just need to be inclusive of people, don't overwhelm them with information. Don't be judgmental when they make mistakes or if they don't know something, and just kind of guide them in the right direction. So the dream isn't dead, but with all these obstacles from Windows dominance to the steep learning curve, you know, all this hardware and software compatibility issues, the year of the Linux desktop seems pretty far away. Although it's quite evolved since its creation, and so many people have been getting concerned about privacy and freedom, for Linux to really hit mainstream, we've got to kind of fix all those issues, or at least tackle them. And while companies aren't going to cater to the Linux audience, the Linux desktop is still going to be a niche, and I think that's alright. We have our own space for enthusiast developers and so much more. So, you know, not everyone's like that type of person where they want to nitpick every single part of their system and know what exactly everything does. And instead of chasing that impossible dream, like this utopia where literally everyone uses Linux, we can just invite people who want to learn, be supportive of them, encourage them, and, you know, advise Windows users, you know, to opt out of these telemetry things and not use these really bad privacy features they use. And if more people start to recognize those things, Linux can grow into something a lot bigger than we could expect. So thank you. There's a QR code with my LinkedIn, but in general, don't scan QR codes from other people. But yeah, is there any questions? Yep.
What do you use?
I use Artix. Yep.
Have you heard of arsenic?
No, I haven't. Yep.
Do you know how to reliably get more than 2 monitors working on the Linux distro? Because I've struggled with that for 5 years now.
It depends on what desktop environment or window manager you use. But I use a tiling window manager, but the documents that I've seen for configuring multiple monitors, they've worked fine for me. I don't really know about other ones, but the ones that I mean, we could talk about it afterwards if you're interested in that, but the documentation has just been fine for me. As in its compatibility with Linux, or yeah, I for me, I've used it. Yeah. Yeah. I think I struggled with it at first, but I somehow got it to work. I don't remember how, because this was like years ago. But I've only had like one pair of Bluetooth headphones, and they worked fine. I think as long as it's not Apple, it will probably work.
What do you think about telemetry on recent sort of mainstream Linux distributions? Is there like a telemetry thing in that space?
The Ubuntu has sort of done that. I think it is also opt-out. I think the last time I heard about it was opt-out, and when you were installing it, it would kind of ask you those types of questions. I disagree with that in general, hence why I don't encourage people to use those types of distributions that do collect data on their users. Yeah, in general, I don't think it's a good idea, or like a good feature in general, so yeah. Any others? Yeah? It's a very good question. It'd have to be tied with Ubuntu and Slackware, probably. Both of them were quite a pain to use, to be honest. Yep. Yep.
I'm trying to construct like the weird license things for dogs. Like Latin or something. So I wondered if it's just something so niche that you have more. You know what I mean? It's like
yeah. I used to use Alpine, which not a lot of people use, because I think they were mainly for containers. Yeah. That's not really a desktop distro, but I've used that in the past, and most people who use that tend to be quite nice. Yeah. Yep.
Do you think WSL, Windows subsystem Linux, running Linux inside Windows, is that not going to agree?
I would probably say no, because you're still going to have the issues with like Windows boot times, and then also it does still collect telemetry, and then also still that the performance is going to be a lot worse. So I would probably say no to that one. But
how about running the way around running Windows inside Linux?
I do have a Windows VM solely for the things I have to do for college, like Microsoft apps and stuff like that. Is really, really laggy though, so probably wouldn't recommend that. Yes, exactly. Superior, yep. Are there any more? Yep.
You already said a good back on those.
No.